So welcome everybody to Speaking of Schools, which is an ongoing webinar series that we do at Save Our Schools Arizona Network. We cover all kinds of topics from course fighting privatization, things about ESA vouchers. We recently had Speaking for Schools on advocating for public education in rural America. And we look at the history of race in vouchers and privatization. And so I'm dropping a link in the chat for those of you who are joining us tonight on Zoom. And for those of you watching the video, you can just go to Save Our Schools Arizona Network on YouTube, and it'll pull up all of our videos. So for those of you who are not familiar with Save Our Schools Arizona Network, we are a nonpartisan, community-based organization fighting for strong public schools in Arizona. And so today we are really excited to have Integrated Schools with us to really help us better understand how to navigate the privileges and perils of school choice. So I am going to turn it over to Anna. If you guys who are with us on Zoom will remain muted during the presentation, but please feel free to post questions in the chat, and our presenters will do their best to respond to those, but we'll also have time at the end for questions and conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Anna and Sonia.
Thank you so much, Sharon. It's so nice to be with you all. Yay. I am going to, and I just want to make sure everybody can hear me and everybody can see my screen. If you please let us know in the chat and we will technologically try and rectify that. Okay, cool. Awesome. It's such a pleasure to be here. I just want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Anna. I am a white mom based in Phoenix, Arizona. My pronouns are she, her. I'm on the indigenous land of the Akimel O'odham, the O'odham Jewett, and the Hohokam indigenous people. And I'm a volunteer with Integrated Schools. Sonia?
And I'm Sonia. I'm also a volunteer for Integrated Schools, and I'm a parent to a middle schooler who will be going into public school.
As Sharon said, please use the chat for questions. It's a meaty presentation. We're trying to get as much into as short a time as possible so you can get back to your lives this evening. And just know with presentations, I want to talk real fast. I want to get it all out there. And my experience in doing this work is that this is more than an hour conversation. This is many conversations with a whole lot of nuance. So we're not going to really solve it all, fix it all, or explain it all tonight. We're hoping to just open the conversation and breathe some life into it here in the Valley and really in Arizona. So here we go. I'm going to make sure that I can successfully, there we go. Navigating the privileges and perils of school choice. And if you're here, chances are, unless you already know us and we're just excited to come and be friends, chances are when you think about school choice, it can provoke some fear and anxiety and questioning if you're a parent or a caregiver making those choices. Am I going to make a mistake? What is a good school? What is a bad school? And what are other parents doing? And should I be doing what other parents are doing? It looks like I should. I don't know. So I just want to say, Sonia and I are volunteers, and we're here to share our experience with making sort of equity-driven school choices as individuals that have privilege. We're just sharing our experience. So we don't have it all figured out. We're going to step on it. We're going to make mistakes, and we're going to move forward. So I first want to define, what do we mean by the privilege of choice or choice privilege? And the term privilege can really fire people up. It can make people that have a lot of privilege kind of nervous. And I don't want to get into a lot of wordy definitions. That's a whole other webinar that we can point you towards. But really, when we are talking about privilege in the context of today, we really want to think of it as access. So access to information, access to safety, access to resources. And so in that context, when we say choice privilege, what we basically mean is the resources that one needs to collect options and choices of all the schools available, understanding that you're weighing choices against each other with many options from which to choose. And it really also means understanding the systemic way that school choice works: tours, deadlines, wait lists, applications, magnets, transportation. And if you're here and if you made it to this webinar, the chances are is that choice privilege is something you have and hold. And you may not know how to choose, but it's very possible that if you're here, you know that you have choices. And so for this moment, take a minute, just a second, don't have to write it in the chat, don't have to share, but maybe think through in that context, what choices you have. And I know for me, when I think about the choices I have and the privilege I have, it's also helpful to sort of remind myself that those choices and privilege can also really give me a biased way of looking at things. And this is not to be intimidating, guilting, shaming. Like, it's really, again, about acknowledging access. We don't need to be ashamed, but we need to be aware. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Sonia.
Okay, so for the goals of this workshop, as Anna eloquently defined choice privilege, we're going to also do our own self-reflection on our own school experiences. We'll share stories of how we made our school choices and why, and give an extremely brief historic overview and some context as to why this history is relevant to our choices, and understand the benefits of integrated schools. And lastly, empower you to make community-centered decisions about how we choose schools. And then, of course, this webinar is timely, almost 70 years after Brown versus Board of Education made segregated schools illegal. Our nation's classrooms remain stubbornly segregated, and by some measures, even worse than 1954. So with that in mind, let's kind of think back when you were in school and what was your experience? Were you in a segregated school, or was your school integrated? Do you think fondly of your school experience, or do you want something different for your child? So you might not have known it, but if you were in school in the 80s and 90s, you probably experienced a backlash of resistance to desegregation. And then again, it can open up, more. And this is, again, we're just going to talk about this in this moment and not go on and have several webinars about it. But either you were white and you saw that the majority of your classmates were white, or you were a student of color and you saw that your classmates were Black and brown. And this is something that you are just thinking on your own. You definitely don't have to share this. And how do you think that impacts your decision on where your child's going to school? And so I'll share my experience. When I look back when I was in school as an Asian American, I was in a class where the majority of students were white. And ironically, this is the exact same situation my daughter is in now. And so she's in middle school. And so she's been in charter school for elementary and middle school. And I think I just came to a pivotal moment where I thought, what do I really want for my daughter going into high school? And I realized that my daughter's charter school was limited in their curriculum and what they could offer her, just in terms of as how she's going to grow as a person. That's what I was really concerned about. So I decided to look at schools around me, and most importantly, I looked at the school that was 5 minutes away from my house. And despite having some challenges trying to reach the front desk staff and schedule a tour, I realized that, a public school doesn't have their own marketing and public relations department. In contrast to the charter school where my daughter goes, they have a dedicated marketing director. And it made me wonder if schools should really adopt a business-like approach. Nonetheless, I persisted, and eventually I met with a counselor at the high school, and I went on a guided tour. And I was pleasantly surprised to discover a wide range of educational opportunities and extracurricular activities that wasn't advertised on the high school website. And what I have witnessed in my daughter's charter school is that there's limited exposure to diversity, meaning that students may have limited exposure to individuals from diverse racial and cultural backgrounds, which could lead to lack of understanding and empathy towards others. And that's the kind of, I think this is what was the greatest concern to me, is that narrow worldview, that lack of understanding of social realities outside their own community. And studies such as those conducted by the National Bureau of Economic Research have found that diverse school environments promote positive social outcomes, including increased cross-racial friendships, reduced racial prejudice, which benefits all students. And then the perpetuation of stereotypes. So segregated environments can perpetuate stereotypes and biases, as students may not have opportunities to interact with individuals who challenge these preconceived notions. Also, the inadequate preparation for diverse society. So students in a predominantly white school may lack the cultural competence and understanding needed to navigate and thrive in diverse workplaces. Also, the impact on academic achievement. While privileged children may have access to more resources and opportunities in segregated schools compared to their marginalized peers, the lack of diversity and exposure to different perspectives may limit their ability to think critically, innovate, and problem solve. And then lastly, the reinforcement of privilege and entitlement. So segregated schools can reinforce feelings of privilege, entitlement among privileged children, leading to a sense of superiority that's going to hinder their ability to engage and advocate for social justice. And then Anna will share her story.
I'm muted. It's my first time on Zoom. Okay. So, oh, and I think we have somebody in the waiting room. If we want to admit them, please. Thank you. So I'm jumping right in. Here we are, have my little one, my oldest kid on her first day of kindergarten, at our neighborhood school. And we lived in LA at the time, in California. And when my daughter, and just to back up a little bit, I went to highly segregated private school growing up. I lived in a highly segregated environment. And as I grew up and entered more diverse spaces, I felt really ill-equipped. And I felt like I had been misinformed, and I had a lot of biases and a lot of prejudices that had not been challenged. And so I really wanted something different for my daughter. And so when we were living in a very diverse city, I knew I wanted that. And then I got really focused in motherhood as parent and parenthood, as we do. And I noticed that I was segregating my daughter in the same way that I had been, even though I was in a very diverse environment. And I noticed that I was doing all of these things, building spreadsheets and applying to private schools and interviewing other parents in my neighborhood, who were doing all of these things, applying to magnets, applying to charters, applying to privates, and really using this kind of consumer model of choice around the school. And meanwhile, we had a school walking distance from our house that was a global majority Title I school. And just to define those terms, global majority, previously, global majority means people of color, predominantly people of color, because you know, in my world growing up, I was taught to think that white people were the normal, because that was all I was around, and that was what was on TV, and that was what was in books and media. So to reframe that, you know, our school was predominantly students of color, and it was a Title I school, which means that more than 50% of the students at a school, in order to be Title I, 50% or more of students are receiving free and reduced lunch, eligible for social safety net programs, or fall below the poverty line. So we saw this school. I met someone who was to become a dear friend who had started integrated schools. And she said to me, you know, people like you do things like this. They just go to their neighborhood school, even if it doesn't have the test scores that you're looking for, or it doesn't have the other white kids that you're looking for. And you might just have a great experience, and it might open your eyes. So we did. This is her kindergarten year in her school. It was a great experience. You know, going in, I'll be honest, like, I made a lot of mistakes. I had a very savior mentality. I was going to make the school great. I know how that sounds. And that was where I was at the time. And I got a big lesson, and a lot of really compassionate community members were able to tell me the truth about how the way I was showing up at the school was landing. And I was able to kind of pivot and adjust and make amends and show up like one person, one family, one parent at school. And it was a great experience. You know, some things weren't great, but I think that happens at every school. You know, some things you love, some things you don't, but overall, it was a really positive experience for my daughter and for us as a family. And then when we moved to Arizona, it was in the middle of the pandemic. And as you can see from my children's headgear in this next photo, so I had two kids, and I had I had a much more relaxed approach. We weren't able to tour any schools because of the pandemic, but I actually had a lot of confidence. And so we knew what neighborhood we were moving into, and we went to that neighborhood public school. And it was very similar to the school. It was a global majority school. It was a Title I school. And it was one that maybe the folks that had a lot of choice privilege around me weren't choosing, but we chose it, and we've been there now as a family for a few years, and it's been a great experience. And here are my kiddos now. They're thriving and growing. And I just want to say, you know, every day I see deeply committed families, staff, teachers, working really hard to create a safe and healthy learning environment for all the kids at our school. And it's been a really positive experience. So, you know, I want to pause for a moment and say, our job at Save Our Schools, and our job is to, you know, hype up and pump up our state and our nation's public schools. And I really do believe that. My blood runs for public schools. And I'm also very aware that it's not a rosy picture, right? Like, our schools are underfunded. Our schools have a lot of challenges with old curriculum, with old pedagogy, with stuff, you know, that doesn't serve all kids equitably. And so I want to hold both, and right, that our schools are underfunded, and our schools are also serving kids every day. And the majority of our nation's students still attend public schools, and they're worth investing in and not divesting in. So, for example, you know, these are just some of the things. Transportation. My kids take the bus. It's fantastic. It's fostering their independence. It's giving me an extra hour in the workday, basically, when all is said and done. They've got music, orchestra, guitar, choir. They have PE, they have art. I love going into the school because there's tons of the art in the walls is just amazing. And really, there's a lot of student-led engagement at school, which is really beautiful to see. Nutrition, when you choose a school that is Title I, there is a free lunch program and free breakfast. So my kids eat with their peers, and it's a great way to like foster community. And again, it's definitely helpful for a lot of families to have that need be met at school. I also see like committed credentialed teachers and staff that really loves my kids and all the kids at school, as well as awesome after school programs and clubs. So there's my cheerleading pom-poms for my public school. So and I want to remind everyone, we're going fast. We're going to throw a lot of information out there. This is going to be the briefest, most reductive history lesson ever. And like this slide alone that I'm showing you could be its own, doctoral thesis, its own college course, its own, multi-part series. But I'm going to just kind of whiz through it. And we also want to invite anyone that registered. We'll be sending out a resources guide with all of the incredible sources that Sonia and I have used to create this presentation. So if any of this is interesting to you, chances are we pulled it from somewhere, and we're really interested in sharing these resources with you. Some 3 amazing books that are really powerful when we're talking about the history of school segregation, desegregation, and integration are Jim Crow's Pink Slip by Leslie T. Fenwick, The Mothers of Massive Resistance by Elizabeth McCrae, and White Rage by Carol Anderson. So those will be in the resources guide that we share. So here we are, Brown versus Board of Education overturned Plessy versus Ferguson in a unanimous decision, stating that separate but equal educational facilities are inherently unequal, violating the Equal Protection Clause of the Fourth Amendment. And the ruling was that separate is inherently unequal, but really, even if separate could be equal, which obviously it wasn't, it would still be a constitutional violation. So that decision set in motion an attempt to desegregate by court order, by busing, by redistricting, and subsequent Supreme Court decisions throughout many states. And unfortunately, it was really one directional. And so in the process, schools that were serving Black children, that had Black teachers, Black principals, Black staff, that were highly qualified, the vast majority of them were fired or demoted. And so we lost that as a nation, which was truly like a huge loss, and really affected the ability for desegregation to really do what it was intended to do. So and meanwhile, I'm just to say, like in context, when I'm in 8th grade at my white privileged school and I'm learning US history, the history I'm learning is Brown versus Board made school segregation illegal. Yay for the civil rights movement. Let's move on. And so there wasn't really a conversation about what actually ended up happening. And so Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall became the first Black Supreme Court justice. And in 1974, he said, "Unless our children begin to learn together, there is little hope that our people will ever learn to live together." And this was 20 years after Brown v. Board, the Brown decision, and the massive resistance to the policy efforts to desegregate our schools were really in full swing. And again, like there's so much to be said about that, but essentially, desegregation was fought for, and eventually the massive resistance really won out. So you saw it sort of peaking in effectiveness and implementation with much to be desired. But in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and then by the 90s, you really see this backsliding. And so many of the policies that have been put in place by the 90s were canceled, shelved, reversed, determined to be unconstitutional by different Supreme Courts. And that really leads us to where we are now, which is the last 30 years of running back towards a state of segregation. And just really quickly, you know, I want to define, we use the term desegregation and we use the term integration. And desegregation really just is a very two-dimensional. It is about the movement of bodies and seats, and enrollment. Whereas integration, you know, there's an amazing organization, Integrate NYC, and they came up with the 5 R's of real integration. We can share that resource in our guide that we send out. But really, it's so much more. It's about representation, right? It's about having staff and teachers and principals that are representative of student bodies. It is about race and enrollment. It's also about resources, right? Equitably sharing resources. It's about relationship building, and it's about restorative justice. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Sonia, and she's going to talk a little bit about where we are today.
Okay, so you're seeing some data, national data on students according to race, and you'll see the first pie graph with the majority of students here. Sorry. I'm just looking at a smaller screen. I'm just who are there. I mean, basically the white students are attending are in class with students who are majority white. And if you ask most Americans today, the vast majority would agree 100% on the ruling that segregated schools and facilities should be illegal. But yet, according to the data, the segregation still persists. So we're obviously in an incredibly divisive time in our history. And we believe that this is resulting from the lack of empathy, the lack of cultural understanding, and the lack of humanity. And at most extreme, more racism. And then also across the country, almost half of all white students attend a school that is more than 75% white. In Arizona, you'll see that nearly 2/3 of students of color in Phoenix attend a highly segregated school, basically meaning that 2/3 of students that are Black and brown attend a school that is predominantly Black and brown. And most of the people we speak to with choice privilege don't even think about segregation or for a race when they're thinking about what school to send their child. We simply fall into the trap of what everyone else is doing. And as a result, we have stayed segregated. So this next slide, the data can be hard to decipher and understand, but it's important to know about how schools get funded. And again, a really, big topic, but we're just going to talk a little bit about it, just so that you know the importance of how schools are funded. The funding is directly tied to enrollment. Local, state, federal government fund a school based on how many bodies are in a seat. So, of course, there's more detailed explanation of this. You can get that from SOS, which is a great resource. And more specifically, you can see green follows white. For every student enrolled, the average non-white student district receives $2,226 less than a white school district. On average, high poverty global majority school district in Arizona have $10,964 less per student in funding than even the high poverty white school districts. So just to emphasize, that's roughly under $11,000 less per student in funding than the high poverty white school districts. So that's substantial. And I know that's not a real selling point for Arizona schools, but hear me out. Simply by attending a global majority school district, you are in fact bringing enrollment dollars back into that school, keeping the investment in that neighborhood. And oftentimes it's your own neighborhood and community, and it benefits more than just your child. So there's a huge body of evidence that integrated schools are good for all students and good for our communities and economies. There are just a few scientifically studied benefits of integration from a variety of sources, which we'll link to in the resources. And one that's top of mind is exposure to diversity reduces anxiety. Meaningful relationships between individuals with different backgrounds impacts how people treat each other. And learning an integrated setting can enhance students' leadership skills. And I think a big buzzword today is emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence gives you that ability to find common ground with people around you. And so if, our children are going to be future leaders, we definitely want them to be equipped and to have emotional intelligence. And then I hand it to you, Anna.
Perfect. Thanks. Sorry, I was trigger happy with the slides there. Thanks so much, Sonia. So here is so that was a lot. We're in the home stretch where I want to thank everybody for sticking with us. I feel like we just turned the fire hose on and we're like, here's all this information. And so now, bringing it back to those choice points and that choice privilege. Here's sort of the framework that at integrated schools, we want to promote when we're thinking about choosing a school, right? We want to think community, think equity, think future. So community, do the schools I'm considering concentrate resources or privilege relative to the district or city we're in? Then will our attendance at a school help create a more integrated, more desegregated school? And will our choice not contribute to school segregation, either racial or economic? And then finally, thinking about the future, is participating in the attendance and therefore enrollment funding for your community school a vote for public schools as the cornerstones of democracy and civic life that they really are and that we want them to be? So just to give you a little bit, I sort of went through, this is how I looked at when we moved and choosing a school. So I really started by looking at demographics when I was deciding what public schools I wanted to look at. I took my state demographics, I took my city demographics, and then I took my district demographics. And these are available we can send resources with how to find these demographics for your where you live. And so I noticed, wow, compared to my city, my district really was a global majority Title I district. And then I took 2 schools in the district and thought, okay, I'm going to look at these 2 schools. And I noticed that one of them really did concentrate resources and had a concentration of white students that was not the norm for the district. And so based on that, I chose school A because it felt like I could contribute to desegregation and it would be a good choice for my family. It also happened to be the school that we were zoned to, even though Arizona is a choice state, so you can go to any public school that is that has a spot for you. So, I want to say one more thing actually that I wrote down in my notes that I've been thinking about. When I think about, and Sonia touched on this, and I think it's really important, there's an amazing investigative journalist, Nicole Hannah-Jones. She wrote a book called The 1619 Project. She's written a lot of long form articles about school segregation. And one of the things she says is, I love my kid more than I love any other kid in the world, but I don't really think my kid should get more than any other kid in my city or my state. And when I put it in that context, I think, how do I want my kids to grow up? It can feel like, oh, I'm making a stand, or I don't know. But I want my kids' school experience to be more than just academics or social climbing. I really want it to be about learning about their shared humanity, learning about their equalness to others, and being one among many. And I've really seen that happen for my kids. I've seen them thrive even though they have happened to be one of the only white kids in their classes or their grades, and even in a school that's underfunded and under enrolled.
For me, I'm optimistic that once my daughter goes to public school, that she'll have that experience with a diverse group of people. And again, I guess I really wouldn't question anything with my daughter's charter school, except for I just could see the brightness in my daughter diminishing. And it is just this one view that I can see that there's, not excitement to go to school, but as she had when she was in elementary school, that it's just something needs to change. And I'm just looking forward to the possibility of how she'll be in a public school environment. Okay, so with all this information, if you are ready to act, would you be willing to take the 2-tour pledge that's on the Integrated Schools website? It's a great resource for you to look at, especially since you're looking at, what school would be best for your child. And just some good things to take in consideration that you might have not thought of before. So we have the website listed, and what the take the 2 tour pledge is about is touring at least 2 schools that serve the majority of students that are, racially diverse, socially, economically diverse. I can say anecdotally speaking that when I did take a tour and just, physically step into the high school and visited, I just could see that I did have these preconceived notions that, I don't know about their curriculum. I don't know if they're up to par with my daughter's charter school, and all of that seemed to just melt away. Just when there's just interacting with the counselors, with the front staff person that I thought was rude, and she just turned out really to be lovely in person. So I think there's a difference in actually going and taking a tour. So there's my big pitch about that. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you to SOS for hosting us. Thank you, Sharon. I know it's a lot of information we've thrown at you, so please keep in touch. We want, if you're interested, we definitely want to connect with you. And I know, and this information is just scratching the surface. So we'll be sharing these resources in a follow-up email. And then if you have any feedback, we would love to hear it. Having data on efficacy and the impact of the work brings us one step closer to funding it more fully. If you have questions, feel free to stick around. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing, and all of the information that's on the screen right now will be in our resources that we share with you via email. So don't worry about writing everything down. And yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing, and it's open if anybody has questions, and it's also okay if people don't have questions. And you can reach out to us later on, or if you want to have, we have a program at Integrated Schools called the Caregiver Connection, where we just try and link up. People reach out to us through the website. People reach out to us through social media, and they just want to say like, I don't know. And it's sometimes these questions that are specific to our experiences and our kids can be like a lot to ask in a group setting. So we set up one-on-one conversations with parents to help share our experience, strength, and hope with them about the choices we've made, and really that people like you do things like this.
Thank you both so much. You got a comment in the chat I would like to read. So for those who will watch this video later, they will know. So one participant said, you are both incredibly honest and brave in your stories. Students that live in a bubble courtesy of homeschool or private school or charter school, do not have real life experience. These students also don't get to share their talents and personalities with kids who might need friends and role models. Many decisions parents make, while well-intentioned, are done out of fear and ignorance. So thank you for seeking truth and supporting public schools.
Oh, thank you.
That's a lovely thing to say.
Yeah.
And I will just to say thank you to that and add, I have realized what talents and personalities that we would have missed knowing if we had stayed in a highly segregated school environment. We've learned so much, and I just one thing popped into my head when I was reading that lovely message was when my daughter came home from first grade. She's in a monolingual house. We all speak English at home, and she said to me, Mommy, gosh, it's not fair. Everybody at school speaks 2 languages and I only speak 1. And to hear my young child view bilingualism as as a superpower, as a character asset, which it is, and it's instead of and I remember when I was going to school, I had a friend whose parents didn't speak English and it was viewed as this sort of taboo or this biased thing. So to have her have a different experience viewing that as an asset was really a great thing to witness in her.
So I don't see any other questions, but folks, please add some questions in the chat. But just listening to you guys present, if I can just make a comment, I guess we can also make comments. I think we spend so much time at Save Our Schools Arizona fighting for public schools, for funding, for better equity, for teacher retention, all kinds of things like that. And we live in a state that has more choice options than almost any other state in the country. And we have very well-funded groups trying to push the private school but publicly funded options. And so I do think we don't think enough about, well, wait, where do you even begin as a parent, especially with little kids? Like, how do you even start navigating that? And I know just anecdotally over the 7 years I've spent with Save Our Schools, that's come up a lot. Just people with little kids, like, what do I do? How do I do this? I care about my community. I want to make good choices. But it's tough because there are so many options. It is really complicated. And so I'm just grateful to Integrated Schools for coming at it from another way and really being thoughtful and intentional about the choices that we make for our kids and for our families and for our communities.
And I thank you so much, Sharon. I appreciate that a lot. And I will say, from someone who viewed this as with really, really young kids, I remember thinking, and I heard a lot of interesting things from folks that were afraid, right? Who felt like I was making bad choices. I will say, my spouse had some questions originally, and also my parents and my in-laws, really. And so in many ways, I felt like, is something wrong with me that this feels like and so I will say, like, coming at it from a place of like, we want to convene other parents to think through these things together. And they don't have to be thought of as alone, even if in your neighborhood or your community, you may have a global majority Title I school that you're zoned to that no one else is choosing that it can feel really serious when your kids are young. And then Sonia, I don't know if you want to share maybe like how the idea of making the decision with your kiddo, like as an 8th grader, because that was obviously like my kids were not in the conversation. They were 5, right? We were like, they were just figuring out how to pick out their own socks. So Sonia, do you want to maybe talk for a second about that difference? And
I think she didn't know how to articulate it, but coming home from, sixth grade all the way to eighth grade was the message to me, she's expressing, the school, the curriculum, the expressing kind of like, why is this done this way? Why? I mean, I could see as from a 12-year-old, 13, 14, she's expressing to me, and then two, just like the only thing I can say is the brightness is really dimming. And so I said, do you want to look at other schools? Do you want to look at the public school? And then she said, yes. She's like, and then even this year, she's like, I'm so ready to leave. So I think, and also too, if she didn't say anything and she was really happy, I don't know if I would be here too, to be honest, if she was, but just the curriculum I was questioning it myself. I go, basically, what are you not learning? That's what I was really surprised with. And I go, who sets these standards? And I just wish other parents were understood that, and Anna, you educated me that there's a superintendent, there is a school district, there is a voting body. I go, where, charter schools, it's arbitrary, that I didn't know. So I just will share with one charter school, even the teachers were fighting for red for ed. And I just kind of thought, I go, that's really odd because you're in a charter school. I didn't, so, so that's how much of just how people are just misinformed or maybe not informed at all. That's what I think that's a reflection of.
Yeah. So I'll also say, Anna, that I really appreciate as a white woman, I really appreciate the comments you made about being the nice white parent. And I think that in a way we live in a time where we're starting to get smarter about talking about race, and especially about the role white people play in all of this. So you mentioned this book, but I'm going to just give a plug to it. So the full title is Mothers of Massive Resistance: White Women in the Politics of White Supremacy. And it's so interesting to me because it starts with stories of what white women did to stop their kids having to go to school with Black kids after the Brown versus Board of Education decision came down. And so we continue to see that today. You can really draw a line from Brown versus Board of Education all the way up to the privatization that we're experiencing, not just in Arizona, but across the United States, to dismantle our public schools, to shift to a voucher system where public funds would follow the child. They like to say the backpack full of cash model. The problem is that we know studies show that the vast majority of families who take advantage of school choice, like the empowerment scholarship account vouchers that we have in Arizona, especially since they've become universal vouchers, the vast majority of families who use them are well-off white families. And so
who would or were sending their kids anyway.
Right. So the state then subsidizes the education of those kids, leaving our already starving public schools in even more dire straits because kids are being taken away. Some kids are already in public schools and we're funding those, but other kids choose to go to charter schools, which are not funded by vouchers in Arizona. But it's one of the ways that breaks down the traditional community school idea where you've got that great community school in your neighborhood that your kids can walk to or take a short bus ride to. And all of the things that does for our communities and the families in those communities. So anyway, I've just been thinking a lot about the role of white women in all of this. I'm glad that you mentioned Mothers of Massive Resistance. And I think really looking at the role race plays in privatization, both currently in our state and then historically, it's really, really important for us to know how that works and decide whether or not we think that's a good thing or a bad thing or something that we need to change or address. And I feel like you guys at Integrated Schools are having really hard conversations and really honest conversations. And so I really appreciate that.
Thank you. It's such a great book. Always gets me so fired up when I see it on people's bookshelves or in the background. And we like to say, we sort of riffed on Dr. McRae's title and say, one of the things we really like to talk about is transforming the mothers of massive resistance into caregivers of conscience. That like we can have ancestors, right? Like that if my ancestors were the mothers of massive resistance, like I have a responsibility to be a different kind of ancestor. And that has really helped me in the moments where I have seen, especially during the pandemic, really the inequities that really were a part of our public school system laid bare. And there's so much, but the one other thing to add to that beautiful statement you just made, Sharon, was when we when a house is on fire, we go and we rest, we don't like just walk away. And we have a system of public education that's being divested in through the back door, right? And that money is being siphoned away. And I would say, it's an incredible opportunity as a person with the privilege of choice to choose that school, to see the good in it and to see the promise of it by my enrollment dollars, by my care, by my being one among many in a community. And also, we've traditionally, as white women, like we've been more likely to run for school board. We've been more likely to run PTOs and PTAs, and we've had really loud voices at the school level, and some deeply in service to public schools, right? Not to say that it's all, like I don't want to rail on white women all the time, but to really turn that into something that's like, actually, I want to care. I want to care as much, if not more, about the school that's really struggling the most and invest in that school, versus create this consumer model where we're just all trying to shove ourselves into the best to get the best out.
Yeah. Well, so we have just a couple of minutes left, and you guys did cover a lot of ground. So you said we'll follow up with an email with some resources. What are some other, where do we end it? What do we give people for like a key takeaway, things to know, things that they can maybe tell someone else about, to pique interest in your work? How shall we end?
I would love to, Sonia and I are very accessible. Our desire is that we would build a core of families in Arizona that are interested in discussing this more, because there's so much that we are still learning, that we are still, thinking through. So we would just want to connect, at, small group and keep talking about these things. And
And what's the best way? Is there a email?
Yep. We'll send in the email, we'll send, my email address is anna@integratedschools.org. hello@integratedschools.org. You can find us on social media, Integrated Schools, on all the social things. And sign up for our newsletter, take the tutor pledge, you get a resources guide. If you take the tutor pledge, oh, thank you so much, Sharon. If you take the tutor pledge, it will send you an email called the Getting Started Guide. And one of the things we didn't really touch on, I mean, Sonia beautifully touched on it, but this idea of like what happens when you can't tour a school. So we've said, go tour 2 schools, and you call 2 schools, and they're busy educating kids. They're not busy marketing their school. And that can be really tricky. And so there's actually a lot of resources in that guide for what to do if it's difficult to get a tour, if you're not able to take a tour, and you can still consider a school by the timing of this, right? School choice season is technically over. We're at the end of the school year here in May. A lot of people have already made their decisions, quote unquote, for next year. But I will say, the beauty of public school is you can show up on the first day of school. I'm sure my principal will follow me up and say, how dare you, don't tell them that. Please, we need to know how many students, but this is the truth is our schools serve all kids and they will serve you tomorrow.
Yep.
So you can make this decision, you can make it with us. And it's, yeah, that's it. That's all I got.
Awesome. Awesome. Anything you'd like to add, Sonia?
Oh,
Okay,
think
I
we've
didn't
got
mean to
it,
put you on
yeah.
the spot. Well, thank you both so much. Learned so much and really, really appreciate the work you're doing and look forward to keeping the conversation going. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And we will put this up on YouTube and let people know that it is available. So thank
Thanks
you.
so much. Have a great night.
Bye.